Living in the underground. Man, that sounded terrible. Only if it was. Maybe you'd understand why monsters wanted to leave so bad. Probably something symbolic to them. And how did you, a human, end up in this place? Well, it was actually quite silly. You were a talented mountain climber. Okay, not really. You just liked hiking. And Mount Abbott, due to its history, always had this pull for you. The place monsters had been buried so long ago. In some countries, the old stories were regarded as mere myths to be interpreted, rather than actual reality. But you yourself didn't care. In your mind, even if the monsters were real, they would have been long dead by now. Oh, how wrong you were. The day you ascended Mount Abbott, the weather seemed fine. Even the report said it would be sunny with sparse clouds for at least another 4 days. Though what you didn't expect were the harsh winds starting at around the first quarter of the ascent. This would have been the moment most humans would have turned around, yet you were determined. You wanted to reach the peak, and yet, slowed down by the harsh, whipping winds, you sought refuge in a small cavern. Here it was dark, damp and slippery. And as you sat down, the loose stones gave way under your weight. And you fell. The fall was long, longer than it should have been. The narrow hole becoming wider the deeper you got. A fall you could not have possibly survived if that determination within you had been any less. Humanity did not understand their innate ability. A magic so powerful monsters lost the Great War and were banished. Due to humans not having direct control over it, it manifested in the incredible ability to reset and try again. It wasn't reversing time, it was simply severing fate and just continuing where you were. You probably had fallen countless times that day until finally your falling body slapped against enough trees, your fingers attempting to slow the fall by grasping the naked rock, and then your body finally was slowed down enough as it slapped onto a thick and soft bed of yellow flowers. You yourself, of course, weren't aware of any resets, but you were aware of the pain. Deep, deep pain. Your fingers crooked, nails torn and bloody, as you had desperately tried to slow your fall.
Human, that was such a horrible story,
shouted Papyrus, ruining your concentration. You looked around. You and your overactive imagination. For a moment you felt as if you were back in the ruins. You rubbed your forehead. Really?
Yes, I mean, it's scary to think that you died. More than once, in fact. I can't even fathom it. The pain you must have gone through.
The tall skeleton slapped your shoulder. After the harrowing experience of learning that the stories were in fact all true, and the monsters were still alive, and that they were actually almost thriving down here, it was mind-blowing. You've been taken care of by Toriel for a couple of days, and yet your determination to reach the peak of Mount Abbott, it was still there. Still lingering. A deep-rooted desire. And so you eventually left. Promising who by then you had considered your second mother, that you would free all monsters from the underground. No exceptions. You'd run, you'd hide, and you'd hurt no one. That was your promise to her. And so far you did quite well. For a few weeks now you had been living in a small town called Snowdin. A quiet little village within an underground forest that was always covered in a thick layer of snow, as the name suggested. The inn of the town was too expensive. And after some convincing, you managed to crash in the house of two skeleton brothers, Sans and Papyrus.
You have heard the story countless times, Pap,
chuckled Sans, his mouth turning into a big smile.
Well, I mean, the story could change at any moment.
You smiled. It's a recollection of how I got here. It's not a fantasy story I came up with. Sans laughed and slapped you on the back. He was small compared to his brother. As a matter of fact, he was even just a tiny bit smaller than you. And yet, his deep voice and maturity made him appear bigger than anyone else you had met in the underground yet. Even Toriel.
Hey, Grilps,
he suddenly shouted. The fire elemental and owner of Grilby's Bar, the restaurant you and the Skeleton Brothers frequented, had arrived with your orders. Nothing much, just fries for everyone. You had refused meat ever since you arrived. Not because you're a vegan, but because meat was magically conjured food, and it was really only eaten for the taste. It wasn't filling at all. Because of that. At least potatoes and some other plants grew in the underground, thanks to the diligent work of the Vegetoid monsters. After all, you weren't really hyped over eating snails, which was the only real meat available down here. Thank God you had managed to talk Toriel out of ever serving you snails. You pulled down one of your scarves and grabbed a few fries. In the underground, you wore thick layers of clothing. Well, yes, you needed that due to the cold of Snowdin, you also used it to hide from the royal guard. A layer of cloaks and winter clothes made you appear like a young monster that wasn't well suited for the cold. Yet due to your friendship with the skeletons, it created a convenient cover story. To them, you were just a roommate.
I do appreciate you trying to free us. Yet I'm glad the call to adventure hasn't pushed you further into the underground just yet.
Chuckled Sans, and you blushed. Glad he couldn't see it. Yeah, sure, you had gotten swept up by the excitement of Snowdin. But also something else kept you.
Sans, you know to leave Snowdin, the human has to challenge me. I mean, what else am I supposed to tell Undyne then? If they don't fight me, if I don't even try stopping them?
And I told you countless times I promised Toriel not to fight anyone. The skeleton jumped off of his chair.
Well, then you're staying. By the way, today's spaghetti will be served with spinach.
Your eyes widened in horror. So did Sans's eye sockets. You still haven't forgotten the last time Papyrus attempted using ingredients other than tomatoes and noodles. He had called it the appetizer. The meat sauce stains were still on the kitchen ceiling, and occasionally you could still hear the loud roars of his concoction coming from the forest. What kind of necromancy did he even accidentally use for that? After your meal, Papyrus paid, as he was quite offended at the ever-increasing tab of Sans. And, well, you yourself didn't have any money to speak of.
I have to recalibrate my traps, and then I shall return home, post-haste.
Okay, Pap,
said Sans, after the three of you left Grilby's. You and Sans then walked the opposite direction of the tall skeleton, to their house.
Man, I thought he'd be home all day today.
If we're lucky, it takes too long. And there will be no spaghetti today. You retorted.
That would be a nice change of pace. Can you imagine what he could do with spinach?
No, I really can't. You turned your head towards the tall skeleton, who was about to make a turn and then was out of view. It was then you quickly grabbed Sans's hand and blushed. Meanwhile, the skeleton smiled. Well, not like you spent all day like a sitting duck in the skeleton home. No, you spent all day sitting on top of Sans. Over the few weeks, you had developed deep feelings for the skeleton. He was the least overly quirky person in all of Snowdin. Even with all the puns and the borderline cartoonish mysteriousness he had built around himself. He was also the one demonstrating just how human the skeletons felt. They had an invisible skin holding them together, and more than likely other skeletons could actually see the magical skin. It was the reason they didn't fall apart. The reason they had strength, and the reason their facial features morphed. What you saw as bones, molding, was just what others perceived due to the invisible bodies. It was something he liked taking advantage of as well. He had seduced you after all. You couldn't believe that he managed to turn your pretend relationship into a real one simply by telling you, hey, it's gotta be convincing, right? Might as well do it. Well, it was fun. And the fact you did it around Papyrus's back made this even more of a ride. Sometimes more figuratively. Sometimes more literally than figuratively. The tall skeleton would probably lose his mind over it anyways, since he saw you as an enemy. And his brother fornicating with the enemy just wasn't something he needed to know. Even though Papyrus really didn't seem to fully grasp the concept of an enemy. Sans's hand squeezed yours as he took the first step on their house's porch. You following him close by. Inside, Sans immediately proceeded to float you, using his magic, onto their couch, where you slept all the time. You chuckled. His magic always tickled. He then threw himself on top of you, his hands giving purchase just next to your head, kneeling above you. You looked up into his blue, glowing eyes. They're glowing again, you teased. Smartly, he gave you a peck on the right cheek.
I doubt they're as radiating as you, my dear.
He hushed into your ear. Your lips twitching into a smirk, you took the zipper of his jacket with 2 fingers, pulling it down without averting your gaze. Monsters were more emotional beings than humans. Unintentionally, therefore, also more romantic, even if they didn't want to be. So this gesture, a simple, seductive look into his eyes, unbroken, except for the occasional blink, that did a lot for him. Well, in return, touches had far less of an effect on him. This and sharing your warmth with him, that always worked. After discarding the jacket, he sat down on your lap, his sensitive ribcage revealed. He lapped out a thick, blue tongue from his mouth. I'm so glad, he huffed. That you have a girlfriend? Glad for what? That you have a girlfriend?
Oh, well, that too.
He leaned down, using one of his hands, undoing the knot of your thick sweatpants with magic, while his other hand gently rubbed against your cheek.
But I'm more glad I finally have a partner with an overactive libido like mine.
He licked your neck with his hot magic tongue, leaving behind bluish salvia that through experience you knew tasted like blueberries. Oh, is that right? You mused. gasping at his touch as his skeletal hand pushed up under your layers of jackets, scratching over your bare skin. You moaned, his little finger prodding at your navel, making you chuckle. Gently he kissed you on the mouth, his strong magic tongue immediately pushing past your loose lips. Of course he wouldn't stop his intrusion. It was very much wanted after all. Aggressively, he licked against your tongue. He was always such a demanding kisser. At least when it came to breeding you, he was gentler. Finally, he leaned back up again, building himself up to maximum size, even if that wasn't much. Though due to your lying on your back, heaving in excitement, that didn't matter. Even if he was playing around a little. You wanted him, and obviously, he wanted you. Thank you to the people who are supporting me on Ko-fi. You guys are keeping me alive. Special thanks to my little darling members, D's Nuts, Nicodemus D, Cat Cove, Kaya Abyss, BitBit, Zings X3, Melufia, Lavender Cheese, Muffin, A Simp, Hella, Nexrist, AJ Anime Girl, and Hopeful. Your support is greatly appreciated, and thank you very much for your kindness.